Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So today I'm going to show you what I did to enhance one of the little broken items in that bundle of broken furniture that I got for $15. And I will leave a link in the description from when I got these items. But this was a really lovely little bed. It was kind of basic, kind of crudely made, but I felt like it had good bones. It had a good structure. It needed to be reinforced and enhanced a little bit. So I thought the profile of it was pretty low. So I added some little half round wooden bead knobs to the bottom of the feet to raise it up a little bit, give it a little bit more height so that the height of the actual bed would match the level of like a little small side table, because before, like its original design, it was too low and you'd have to actually reach up to put a cup of coffee on the side table. And I didn't think that would be very comfortable for my dolls. So I was considering making a mattress for it as well. But the foam I like to use is 1 inch thick, but I realized it would cover up too much of the headboard. And the headboard was really plain, very basic. So while I pondered how to remedy that, I went on to something else. So I went on to try to decide or figure out a way to make the headboard a little bit higher and more dramatic. So I had some wooden beads that I glued together, and after I glued them together, it made it pretty difficult for me to drill through them because the glue had blocked the hole. So to alleviate my frustration, I went on to work on a way to augment or make the headboard look more dramatic. So I had some wood scraps and remnant pieces left over in my "what are you keeping that for" box, and I started to try to figure out how I could make the little wooden beads work together. And when I was finally able to drill through the glue in the wooden beads, I threaded it with a straight pin. And when it was finished, it looked like some modest looking little bedpost. But after I started working with the piece that I wanted to be the central part of the design, suddenly the little beaded bedpost really didn't seem strong enough to carry the look I wanted. So I focused on adding the central piece and then making everything else work around it. So I want you dolls to be aware I actually don't have a plan. I'm just playing right now. All I know for sure is that there's a mood or a feeling that I'm trying to capture. So right now I'm trying to work out a way to mount it or attach it to the existing headboard to make it stable and strong so it won't come off. So I added them to my little decorative piece in a way that they wouldn't be visible from the front of the bed. Now here I was drilling some holes so that I could attach the bedpost to the top of the bed frame as a part of my design. Now dolls, after I attached my little wooden bead bedposts, I realized I really didn't like them. But I went on to work on another part of my idea while I allowed myself to come up with a better idea for the bedposts. Now, for those of you who are new to my channel, I love all types of nail art from my minis. Now, this is the first time using this particular type. These are sort of like appliques, and they're kind of a raised design. And I think a few pieces like this will really help out this really plain bed to make it look a little bit more ornate and fancy. So as I added the little nail pieces to the piece that I wanted to be the prominent part of the design, I decided to add a few pieces to the original part of the headboard. And I really liked the way that looked, so I decided to add a few more pieces. Now, I originally was just putting the little clings or appliques on just with the adhesive that had come on them. And then I realized I would be a little bit more comfortable with a little excess glue behind them. Now, I've got to warn you, dolls, these little clings are pretty delicate, so you have to be careful because they will tear and separate. But overall, they worked really, really good and they were really easy to apply. Now, at this point, I was really liking the centerpiece that I added and even the appliques, but those little wooden bead bedposts had to go. They really were looking very pre-K and they weren't going to get any better as I went along in the design, so I removed them. And I replaced the wooden beads with a couple metal beads, which didn't look much better, but I just set them in place, kind of using them as placeholders to remind myself that I still need bedposts. So I found a remnant of a half round table in my box of scraps, and I added it to the back of the original headboard, and then I added the prominent piece to the top of that. Now, after I secured the prominent piece to the top of the headboard, I sacrificed a couple stairway spindles, and they actually worked perfect for this project. Now, for some reason, I felt like I needed to add gesso to this piece. I actually probably should have started off by staining the lighter wood, but I didn't, dolls. I added gesso. And sometimes this is what happens, dolls, when you have too many ideas going on in your head and you haven't made a solid decision on what you're going to do. So I added the gesso because my original thought was to do the bed in a really, really light color, and I wanted the base to be light so that the dark wouldn't show through. And by the time I was almost finished with the gesso, I realized I really did want the dark base to show through. So dolls, while the gesso was drying, I got another bright idea, and I cut out a small piece of lace to add it to the headboard to make it look a little bit more decorative. So I felt the rose lace piece would be more of an ornament as a centerpiece to the headboard. So I added a little glue and glued it on top of the gesso covered piece of wood. And then I added more gesso. Right while the gesso was drying, I decided I wanted the base color to be dark, so I painted it with brown acrylic paint. I'm not sure if you dolls noticed, but I had removed the lace fabric rose from the headboard, and now I'm cutting this lace piece of paper in half to anchor the focal point of the headboard instead. I really wanted this headboard to look really fancy and ornate, to have more of a Victorian feel, and Victorians were over the top. Things were excessively ornate and fancy, and I think that's kind of fun. So in this frame, I'm just positioning the little half piece of paper lace to determine where I actually want to glue it, and I added a really thin coat of my Gorilla Wood glue. I eyeballed it to center it and then pressed it down to dry. I really think that added the extra dimension that I was looking for this bed. And after I thought the little lace piece was halfway dry, I started to add another layer of the dark brown acrylic paint to the top of it so that it would match the rest of the bed. By the time that I had added the second coat of acrylic paint to the paper lace, the little bed was really starting to take on the mood that I'd been looking for in the beginning. Now that the headboard situation had been solved, now it was the question of the mattress. So my 1-inch mattress, I ended up splitting it in half like you would do a really thick slice of Texas toast. And once I split it, I used a piece of foam core to be my base to give the mattress the firmness it would need to sit on the actual bed frame. Now, to create this thin mattress, I added the tacky glue to the actual foam core and then pressed the thin piece of foam board to that. So here I'm just checking the size of the mattress on the frame before I actually add the sheet, and don't worry, the foam will condense after the fabric is glued down and everything is secured. Now in this frame, I'm adding a little tacky glue to the bottom portion of the foam core before I add my sheet. Now my sheet is actually a really nice sleeve from a men's dress shirt. It's a really nice crisp blue and white stripe. I think the stripe is a perfect scale for this project and I love it. And it reminds me of either cotton ticking or just old-fashioned simple modest bed sheets. Now dolls, when I make the covering for my mattresses, I don't do anything fancy. I literally wrap the mattress or the foam and the foam core in the fabric like you would as if you were wrapping a gift with wrapping paper, except you're using fabric and glue. You just want to make sure everything is smooth and tight, everything laying flat, because no doll wants to sleep on a lumpy mattress. Now I do allow the back center seam to dry before I do the ends so that they don't come loose. And again, you just fold the ends up, lay them nice and tight and smooth, and make sure you have enough glue that it will catch. Add additional glue if necessary. And after you've added the additional glue, go ahead and lock it down. Make sure you hold it down long enough for it to catch. Now, if you have a clover iron, this may be an opportunity or a good time to use it to help the glue to cure faster. Now, I did the other end the exact same way. And just like that, you have a thinner profiled mattress. Now that the dark brown acrylic paint is dry on the bed, I was ready to add my top color. So I mixed 2 shades of turquoise or teal paint and some green. I added a little water to thin out the acrylic paint. And then I mixed it up really good and began to add it to the dark layer of brown paint. And I really think it did a lot to bring out a lot of the detail and made the design much more dimensional, where you could see the lace paper and the nail art pieces that were added to add dimension and texture. So now that my top layer of teal paint is dry, I'm really pleased with the way it looks, and I'm going to sand it a little bit to kind of take the teal top coat off of some of the high areas. And after I sanded it a little bit, dolls, I began to add some of my antique gold rub and buff. I don't know if you saw it coming, but I've been waiting to do this the entire project because I think it'll make it look like at one time it had been a really ornate, fancy bed, but maybe that it had been salvaged. It's a little worn, but it's now being used in the rooming house. And I really love how the antique gold is just hitting the high points. Now you see, dolls, in this instance, I'm using a brush and just kind of dry brushing the rub and buff to not only hit the high points, but to get into some of those really delicate, intricate areas in between the nail art. And I really think this brings it up a lot. I believe the way that I enhanced this headboard really made it a lot more interesting than what it was in its original state. Now, dolls, as I've mentioned before, the rub and buff can become quite addictive, so you have to be careful and not to overuse it. In an instance like this, I really just want to bring up the high points, but it's really easy to get carried away with the rub and buff, especially this antique gold color. I don't know, it's something about it. It just really, really makes you want to go in. But again, I really like the way it enhanced this headboard and made it look a lot more interesting, a lot more antique. It gave it kind of a rustic, antique look. I don't know if it looks Victorian to you, dolls, but it definitely does to me. I know I'm very pleased with it. And I think that's really important when you're making miniatures, that the only person that has to be really satisfied with it is you. Don't worry about what somebody else thinks about your creation. If you like it, that's all that matters. Now, dolls, I didn't do a whole lot to the sides and the edges because they're going to be covered up by the blankets and the bedding. I did make sure I tapped a little bit around the legs of the bed, and then I came back to make sure that I hit the bedpost and around the decorative portion of the headboard. Don't rush through this. You want to make sure you have a nice even application, that it looks relatively uniform, even though you want it to look a little rustic and worn. Again, you want it to look complete. You want it to look finished. Dolls, I really am sincerely happy with the way this little bed turned out. It was really plain, really basic, kind of broken and scuffed up, but I really think these few little ornamental elements really upcycled it a lot. I think after I get all the linen on and some beautiful pillows and things, it'll be a really cozy, inviting place to rest for a weary traveler or some newlyweds. Now, dolls, if you've enjoyed this video today, definitely let me know in the comments. Also, like, share, and subscribe. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.